All right, guys, so we do have another realignment update regarding both the ACC and the Big 12. I'm going to be speculating on where I think the Big 12 goes next, but first, a source says at least 4 current ACC members are against adding Cal, SMU, and Stanford, so it is confirmed it is 4 members that are against it, and the ACC presidents met last night. And they're also going to be discussing Thursday, which was yesterday, and then today again, the ACC right now. Take a look at this. Who would have thought the Pac virus that killed one conference would also infect the ACC? There's big trouble brewing there amongst members. This could get ugly. Yikes. Now, the question for the ACC: if FSU and Clemson somehow leave, are they still able to keep their conference relatively together, or does it get blown to smithereens similar to what happened to the Pac-12? Honestly, I think even if Clemson and FSU leave based on their grant of rights, unless that's completely shattered by eight teams coming together to destroy it, I see that conference sticking together because the Pac-12, they were in a completely different situation. Their TV deal was ending. They were trying to negotiate another one, and it was all through streaming. We know the ACC right now, as long as their grant of rights stays together, they are locked in with ESPN through 2036. That's very valuable to a lot of those teams. So this is not a similar situation. Like if the Pac-12 had a longer TV deal, it would be very unlikely to see Arizona, Arizona State, Colorado making the jump from the Pac-12 to the Big 12. The fact that they did not have a TV deal and they took over a year negotiating one was absolutely critical to that conference being destroyed. But this is realignment. It's all about the money. Maybe it still happens. There is that horror scenario for the ACC if in the grant of rights 8 teams come together and destroy it. We heard about the possible schools earlier this summer that might come together, depending, and then possibly those schools would scatter throughout different conferences, with some of the teams going to the SEC and some teams going to the Big 12. Also, maybe the Big 10 gets some ACC teams. The latest update: the majority of ACC is in favor of expansion, but 4 to 5 of the 15 members are pushing back against the move. Notre Dame receives a vote because it is a partial conference member in football and a full member in all other sports. The Fighting Irish are in favor of adding Stanford and Cal. And the reason they gave, I think that Notre Dame's athletic director came out and said, oh, it would be so sad if Stanford and Cal were not in a Power 4 conference. Like, dude, what does that even mean? It's just the whole Notre Dame thing. I know everyone is tired of it, but you got to join in football. If you really want a full vote on the future of the ACC, you need to be fully into the conference. Because realistically, they say, oh, they're a partial member in football. They're really not a partial member. Let's be honest. Their fans come out and say every day, we pride ourselves on being an independent, and then they say, oh no, we're a partial member. They're not. I know they face 3 to 4 ACC teams a year. They've got to deal with them, but either way, it's just kind of annoying. How close is Gonzaga to joining the Big 12? So yeah, now I want to talk about some Big 12 stuff because they've got a very interesting decision on their hands. They've gone through an expansion, but I'm guessing they want more. We know they rated the Pac-12. They rated the American. They're up to 16 teams. A lot of people think they're going to go to 18. There was speculation. Is it going to be Oregon State and Washington State? I would say right now, I think if you're the Big 12, it did come out that they're not interested in Oregon State and Washington State. It's the idea of adding teams just to add them. It doesn't really make sense. Oregon State, Washington State, not the most followed programs. They're really not going to add value to your conference. They're just going to end up diluting it, and other teams in the conference are probably not going to like that. I'm not saying that Oregon State and Washington State might not get added at a later date, but right now I think the Big 12 wants to see their options. If something happens with the ACC where there's teams available, they would absolutely look at that. And then you also have the idea of forming an absolute super conference in terms of basketball by adding Gonzaga in just basketball because they don't have a football program, and also looking at teams like UConn. I've speculated the next 2 adds by the Big 12 could be UConn and San Diego State. This could come down to a battle where you're looking at San Diego State, you're looking at Washington State and Oregon State. Which is the best? And I think you could make an argument, even though they are in the Mountain West right now, you could make an argument it is San Diego State based on where they're located, along with the fact that they have a brand new stadium. They've been a solid program. It's very close. I feel like you're splitting hairs. I would have to look at the revenue. I would imagine Washington State and Oregon State might be slightly more popular because they've been Power 5. But will Gonzaga, I mean, we've heard this stuff about Gonzaga time and time and time again. They're in the West Coast Conference. They could certainly make a lot more money being in another one. This is not like football, though, because if this was football, Gonzaga already would have joined another conference because they would be making so much more money. But because this is basketball, Gonzaga can kind of get away with being in a crappy conference, winning all those games. I mean, Gonzaga's basketball is a powerhouse, but still, when you're in a conference that bad, the idea, this was earlier, this was actually in the spring, I think, right after March Madness. It was Gonzaga was either going to join the Big 12 or the Pac-12, and they were listening to both offers. Obviously, they're not going to join the Pac-12. Would they go to the Big 12? I think it just comes down to what the Big 12 wants. Do they really want a super, absolutely elite basketball conference? You would have Gonzaga join, but it would be kind of weird because you'd be at an odd number of teams because Gonzaga does not have a football program. Introducing the Big 18, why SMU should join the Big 12. So this person comes out and says that SMU and San Diego State, who have both been rumored, or at least SMU's been rumored to the ACC. Yeah, San Diego State is not. But the idea is SMU and San Diego State to the Big 12. Would those be better fits than Oregon State and Washington State? In terms of TV markets, absolutely. SMU is really wanted right now for a number of reasons, I would say. Well, I don't know if the ACC really wants SMU, but they're giving a good offer because they're saying we don't even want any TV money for the first 5 or 6 years. We just want to get into a Power 4 conference. So that's a pretty good deal if you're going to bring in the Dallas-Fort Worth TV area. And if you're the Big 12, is SMU possibly a better team in terms of market value than a Oregon State or Washington State? That's going to be a big question for them. I also think the ACC is keeping their eyes open on not only SMU, but also other teams in the American like Tulane and especially Memphis. You could see something with the ACC where Clemson and Florida State work out a deal through ESPN where they pay some portion of their buyout. If the grant of rights is really locked in solid and they're forced to pay a buyout, Clemson and FSU could pay something to go from the ACC to the SEC, and then the ACC still would have all of their teams. They would still have their grant of rights through 2036. No other team is likely going to leave that unless maybe Miami gets overzealous or something happens and they can afford it. You would expect them to remain together outside of FSU and Clemson, and it would be a very similar situation to what happened with the Big 12. Of course, in the Big 12, they were coming up on the end of their TV deal. That's why Texas and Oklahoma had some leverage to get out of it. And I believe they got out of it a year early, but it's the idea of you could still lose your two best teams. I mean, the Big 12 just did it, and then you get exposed, but the Pac-12 votes not to take or snipe any of the Big 12 teams, and it ends up killing their conference. If you're the ACC, you're trying to be proactive here in case you lose your two big dogs. You're looking at teams like SMU. You're looking at Stanford and Cal. We've heard reports that Stanford and Cal are not happening. It really doesn't make sense. I agree. And I do think Stanford is headed towards being an independent. I discussed Stanford a lot yesterday. I don't know what happens to California. Maybe it's a similar route. I could very easily see both of those teams, especially Stanford, in the Big Ten if the Big Ten chooses to go up to 20 or maybe even 24 teams. I think those are probably the sweet spots, going to 20 teams and then stopping there, or going to 24 teams and then stopping. But yeah, SMU to the Big 12, you know, it's an option for sure, and it just comes down to the value added in terms of the TV market, and also they would probably be better, they would definitely be offering a better deal than both Washington State and Oregon State in terms of they don't even care about getting paid, or at least those are the reports. Washington State and Oregon State would definitely want something, even if it is coming in the conference at a discounted rate. which inevitably they would. And at this point, they are desperate, I'm sure, to join a Power 4 conference. San Diego State wanted to create a new conference, but it failed badly. So yeah, San Diego State is an interesting team because we heard that they were trying to leave the Mountain West and then they rejoined and faced $17 million, but it got waived because the Mountain West really has no leverage in the situation. And then it comes out a few days ago that they were trying to secretly create a group of 5 super conference that they have denied, but the idea is taking the best teams from the American, the best teams from the Mountain West, and the Pac-4 and combining them into one conference. It seems, almost impossible, but there was also that rumor floating around, so I would be pretty surprised if San Diego State stayed in the Mountain West unless something like Oregon State and Washington State joining the conference. It just seems like they're ready to leave it at this point. They've got a new stadium. They're trying to strike while the iron's hot. And then this is the ACC. So I just kind of wanted to go through this. Let's say for a hypothetical, the ACC implodes just like the Pac-12. What teams would the Big 12 be able to snipe from the ACC? A lot of this depends on what happens with the Big 10. But what I can say is definitely the SEC would get 4 teams. If the ACC does implode, I think the SEC would get Clemson, FSU, and North Carolina, and also possibly Miami, which are honestly the top 4 teams there. This is just in terms of FPI. But I'm guessing that's who the SEC would be targeting. The other teams I could see maybe Duke if they wanted to go academics, and then maybe a team like NC State. There's been rumors that wherever North Carolina goes, NC State also has to go because it's something, to where it's both in North Carolina and they've got an agreement. But either way, it would be those 4 teams. Syracuse, I would probably say Big 10, but I'm not 1,000% sure on that. Pittsburgh seems like a Big 12 team to me. I'd be very confident that if the ACC imploded, Pittsburgh would go to the Big 12. NC State is another team where I don't know if they have to join North Carolina wherever they go, but they could definitely go to the Big 12. Louisville is a team I'd probably see in the Big 10, but right now Louisville's kind of weird. They do have money in their program. Their basketball normally is their strong suit, but they've been terrible. Wake Forest is a team I could maybe see join the Big 12, but they might be in a tough spot depending on what happens. Duke, I think, is probably staying with North Carolina. I don't know how that sets up, but probably to the SEC or the Big 10. Virginia Tech is, they're a good program. I could see them probably in the Big 12. Georgia Tech, they're interesting. They've got the Atlanta Metro TV market, so I could see them in the Big 10. I know there's been rumors about that. Virginia's probably going to the SEC or the Big 10. And then Boston College, that's another team I could see in the Big 12. So I would say Big 12 hopefuls here if the conference does completely get ripped apart. Syracuse, Pittsburgh, NC State, Virginia Tech, and Boston College, possibly, maybe even Louisville you can throw in there depending. But guys, if they were able to get like Miami, that would be such a huge coup for them. But I don't see that happening based on the Big 12's current TV deal being in line with the ACC. It really doesn't make sense for a lot of these teams to want to leave the ACC for the Big 12 based on the money. They would much rather stay, I'm sure, in the Atlantic Coast Conference, but we will see what happens with the grant of rights because some of these teams know they can get better deals, but is it enough to get rid of the grant of rights completely? We will see. Either way, guys, that is going to do it for this video. Make sure you follow me on Twitter. Link to that's always in the description.